It is game day. Finally here. Game day is here. The start of the regular season. I hope you all are or have enjoyed the first night of NBA basketball of the 2023-24 season. But it's the Orlando Magic's turn, and we're going to preview all things about the Orlando Magic with the voice of the Orlando Magic Radio Network, Jake Chapman, on today's episode of Locked On Magic.
You are Locked On Magic, your daily Orlando Magic podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And you are indeed Locked On Magic. Today is or will be October 25th, 2023. My name is Philip Rossman-Reich. I'm the expert and site editor over at OrlandoMagicDaily.com. You can follow me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD. On today's episode of Locked On Magic, we're going to chat with the radio voice of the Orlando Magic, Jake Chapman, get a full preview of the Orlando Magic season, how expectations have changed, the edge in the voice of the Orlando Magic as we get set for tonight's opening game against the Houston Rockets. We're going to get to that coming up here in just a moment. But first, we want to thank you again for making Locked On Magic part of your day every day, no matter when you listen to us, whether it's first thing in the morning, whether it's right when we upload. We truly appreciate you making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. Remember, there's a great Locked On podcast covering every single team in the NBA. Just search for Locked On and the team you're looking for. The Locked On Podcast Network, it's your team every day. Before we dive into the conversation with Jake Chapman, I just want to say a couple quick words about tonight's game. We are facing the Houston Rockets, the dreaded Houston Rockets, remember 1995. And this is a game that's going to be a challenge. I know that the Rockets are not thought of as a great team. They had a terrible record last year. They ended up with the fourth pick in the draft to take on Amen Thompson. But this is a much different team than what we saw last year. Remember, Houston beat Orlando in the Amway Center early in the season last year, led in the fourth quarter before a miraculous comeback, one of the best comeback wins of the season for the Orlando Magic, where they used a 2-3 zone to completely flummox a young Rockets team. This is a Rockets team that, like the Orlando Magic, is on the come up. They got a new coach in Ime Udoka who's going to bring a lot more seriousness to them. They added veterans in Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks to the team that is going to, again, add some maturity, some mentorship to this team. They've got another year of Jalen Green, who's a very good scorer, as Magic fans certainly know, as well as a sophomore year in Jabari Smith Jr. and another young guy in Alperen Sengun, who NBA nerds know, but you may not know. He's very, very good. This is a humongously challenging game for Orlando, and because you don't know what they're exactly going to look like with so many new faces and so many new pieces, but this is a challenging game for Orlando because they've got to focus on themselves. Jamal Mosley said it really well at practice on Tuesday. The goal for this Orlando Magic team is to play better basketball. The way you play better basketball, you don't turn the ball over, you get back in transition, you finish defensive possessions with rebounds. Those are the three keys to the season. Those will be my three keys on the graphic, on my Magic Wands coming up. Those are the keys to the season. That is the central thing to the season. That is all that matters. Nothing else matters. Nothing else is important. Nothing else is relevant except those three things. The Magic do those three things, they're going to set themselves up for success. So tonight, yes, the Rockets are a very good team, and I don't want to overlook them. Tonight, Wednesday night, and I might publish this on Tuesday night, but this opening game is about the Magic and what they're able to do. And that's the exciting part, because this Magic team does have a lot to get excited about. And certainly we are excited to see what this team can do. And that's why I wanted to bring on Jake Chapman to chat a little bit about the Orlando Magic and about what he sees as he gets ready to call the season. Let's hear from Jake Chapman of the Orlando Magic Radio Network. And we are now joined by the radio voice of the Orlando Magic. It's Jake Chapman. You can hear him on the Orlando Magic Radio Network. I believe that's 96.9 The Game here in Orlando. You can, if you're not in Orlando, you can check elsewhere. I think Audio League Pass is still a thing. But Jake, we are here on the eve of the Orlando Magic's 35th anniversary season. what's your vibe on the season? I mean, I know I've talked a lot about vibes on my end. I think fans are really feeling this year. What is today like getting ready for that first game?
It's on my end. It's exciting. Obviously, it's a lot of preparation that goes into getting set for the broadcast. In the preseason, obviously, is where you work the kinks out. So you're ready to kind of put on a show and have it be as close to flawless, and it never will be. But you're ready to sort of do it for real, which I guess is kind of similar to the way they're all feeling. As far as the season goes, I think you can speak to this, fellas, as well as anybody. I mean, there's some very real positive vibes. There's some very real, I think, expectations. I think just the fact that the players and coaches aren't shying away from those speaks to the level of confidence and the fact that I think everybody, contrary to maybe the past few years, everybody knows that they have a real chance to be a part of this. I think everybody knows their role. We're not going into the season thinking, well, if we have this guy healthy, then this might work. And we're not going into the season thinking we got to get looks at these guys before February in the trade deadline. You've got a somewhat set rotation. You've got a somewhat set, top 15 and 18 with the two ways. And so it feels like, last year it was all about kind of leveling up. This year feels like sort of legitimizing what we've been building toward the last couple of years. And so it's exciting, and nothing is more exciting than the first thing I mentioned, which is the fact that we're healthy. So I think you can count on no matter what the first 25 games not being a throwaway this year, and this not being some massive fact-finding mission, right? Like now you go out there and you have some expectations, and winning is really the only thing that's going to be acceptable. Maybe not winning at as high a level as you hope to eventually, but at least showing some serious progress.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I mean, we should take a moment and pause here that despite what Jamal Mosley said at practice today, the Magic may not be fully healthy heading into this opening game tonight against the Rockets. Kevon Harris is still dealing with that sore knee. Gary Harris was added to the injury list as well. So there's always something. But, I think that brings up, kind of reflecting on that on the 5-20 start last year is being one of the main reasons why the Magic weren't able to take, maybe the step that they thought that they took, or at least the record not reflecting the steps that they took last year. We know continuity is a big deal for this team, but how big is the depth for this team? Being healthy, number one, so you have everybody in reserve, especially for a training camp, which this team hasn't had very often. Having everyone in reserve, but also adding in a veteran like Joe Ingles. Rookies are rookies. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to struggle. But Anthony Black and Jett Howard adding to that depth as well with what they might be able to provide. I think I've said this a few times this week. I've sat in this chair on this podcast and said, "Oh, I think this Magic team's really, really deep," and it didn't prove to be true for just because you're banking on some guys developing. But this team really does seem like it's got some depth. What kind of impact do you think that's going to have?
I know exactly what you're talking about because we all did it last year. We talked about depth, but we were talking about depth as far as guys who are hoping to develop, depth as far as guys that you needed to see on the floor because you weren't sure what exactly you had there. Not depth with winning in mind, I think, necessarily. Joe Ingles comes in and he is a veteran. Like, he makes the team better no matter what. Not to mention, the minutes that he's going to be eating up, he's a better player, right? Period. You think about having two lottery picks who are not going to be asked to do much until they either force their way into the rotation or until an injury occurs, which will happen. Like, those guys are going to get opportunities, but I fully expect them to spend time at Osceola this year. Think about Goga Batadze, who is like a pretty dang good third center if you look across the league at the depth at that position. So I think you obviously have depth in case of injury. You have depth just as far as it's been 3 years of building this roster, a lot of young, good talent, but also, again, contrary to years past, the guys, your top 10 are all guys who have been in the system now for a while and guys that you can count on and guys who understand their roles. That familiarity is so big, and you're not talking about just sort of Paolo and Franz and filling in all the pieces around them. Some of the guys who have been here the longest are in the starting lineup with them, and Markelle and Wendell, and then Cole's been here a long time now at this point. You think about that bench, obviously with JI, but Gary Harris and Cole Anthony coming off the bench, like those are two pretty dang close to starting caliber guards to have in your second backcourt. So I think the depth is obviously it's something that we talked about a lot when you're going, who's going to get the minutes, who's going to be your starting point guard, and what's your rotation going to look like. But now we're talking about depth of guys who have been here. And then you're talking about the guys kind of at the end of the bench of guys who will get opportunities, but guys who need to earn it first.
Yeah. And again, I'm a big believer of this. You have a roster of, now 18 players with the three two-way guys. You're going to need every single one of them at some point this season. I know the NBA is trying to get rid of load management, but the reality is not everyone plays 82 games. There's going to be a Caleb Houston game. There's going to be a Jet Howard game. There's going to be a Anthony Black game, a game where they make some meaningful contribution to the team. And, I think, I always say this and I think, people can disagree with this statement or not. NBA players are NBA players. What makes the difference between a good team and a bad team is asking players of a certain level to do more than they're capable of. Last year, the Magic needing a big Kevon Harris game every night or needing a big Admiral Schofield game every night. And those guys are good players. And, Admiral Schofield had 2 or 3 games where he helped the team win. Kevon Harris was key to that Golden State Warriors win. He's a very, very good player. But are they, and I think this is the thing that this team as a whole is going to have to continue to get better at is learning how to play every single night. And, the fact of the matter is, like, you don't want to rely on, Kevon Harris to have to be a 5-rebound guy every night to win games. And because of all the injuries, because of the lack of depth, that's where the Magic were put at. And, you look at the three two-way players this year, they're good players. I like Admiral Schofield's done a lot of really good things. Kevon Harris has done a lot of really good things. Trevelyan Queen's done a lot of really good things, but unlike you don't want them playing 30, 40 games like they have been for the last 2 years. And I think that's the biggest difference in the depth is, the Magic have some talented players deeper on their roster. Like Goga Bitadze is going to have some games where he's going to play some very big minutes, and the Magic are going to need him to play well to win games. But you're not going to be leaning on that every single night because, this might be a little harsh to say. There's a reason guys slide into the roles they slide into, and all that. That's part of the NBA ecosystem, and it feels like this Magic team has that clarity of focus. We'll get back to our conversation with Jake here in just a moment, but first, a quick word from our friends over at PrizePicks. It is the start of the NBA season. It's the start of a new fantasy season for basketball. And look, all due respect to the other fantasy games, PrizePicks is the most fun I've had playing fantasy sports, playing daily fantasy sports, winning up to 25 times my money this football season, this basketball season, anyway, any sport really. You just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projected stats, and place your entry. I'm actually going to enter a prize pick entry right now. I'm going to go through the list of players for this game, for the Orlando Magic, if they're posted, and tell you the picks that I like. Looking at this Orlando Magic game, if I can get there fast enough, where are you? We got Paolo Banchero, 21.5 points. It's really simple. All you have to do is click on Paolo Banchero and another player and say whether they're going to score more or less than their projected outcome. They got Franz Wagner at 17.5 points. To me, that is easy money. Markelle Fultz at 13.5 points. I'm going to do a 3 Magic player prize pick. I'm going to pick the over on, or the pick more on all of those, and I'm going to watch the money come in. PrizePicks offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select players' projections up to 25% right, even more value, and really guarantee that you get at least one right. With the PrizePicks reboot policy, your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For NFL games and college football top 25 matchups, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with this injury insurance. I love playing PrizePicks. I made a lot of money on PrizePicks. I continue to make a lot of money on PrizePicks, and I continue to love playing this game. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match of up to $100. I want to ask you this. You've been at a lot of the media availabilities over the years. How much of an impact has Jamahl Mosley made on this team and their growth and development, and how is he going to be a big factor in this season?
I think whenever you hear him talk, and you can speak to this too, everything just feels genuine. Like, we've interviewed coaches before who feel like they're just giving you the line. They're just there because they need to be. I've interviewed coaches before who felt like car salesmen, like I didn't believe anything that was coming out of their mouth. With Coach Mosley, I think there's a sense of, and part of this is, I don't want to say that ex-coach or ex-players, especially like ex-really good players, none of them have this element to them, but like, he comes off as a grinder. Like, Coach Mosley put in the work to even carve out a professional career. Like, he wasn't, a first-round draft pick. He wasn't a well-known college prospect. He traveled around the world for the love of the game. And then he started really at ground zero in the coaching world and worked his way up in film room, and scouting, and X, Y, and Z. So I think, like, automatically, whether it's Paolo Banchero or Admiral Schofield, there's like something that they relate to with him. And then I also think he had the appropriate level of patience, demeanor, communication skills to get through what I think we all knew were going to be 2 really difficult years, the last 2 years, and what could be another one this year, right? Like, we're still very young. We have expectations, but if it goes sideways at any point, and 1 or 2 injuries can do that, or, a 10-game losing 8 out of 10 can do that. I think he knew how to deal with the disappointment and knew how to sort of treat it as a learning, educational development experience. But now, and this is a tricky thing, because if you build that culture and there's not really much expectations, and hey, it's okay, everything's about learning the lesson and not making the same mistake tomorrow, it can be really easy to get sucked into that, young players especially. So now it's going to be really interesting to see how do you kind of turn it on a little bit. How do you up the level of expectations? And you lose, Phil, you lose games in this league with the slimmest of margins. And so one leave your feet turnover can be the difference between winning and losing that night. And so I think you kind of get a sense there's a little bit more edge there when you talk to him. It feels like he's not going to put up with some of the stuff he has in the first 2 years. And without like a really deep level of trust, I don't think you can kind of alter your management style unless they know that what you're doing is going to be for the betterment of the team, but then also for the individual, especially in the NBA.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially these first 2 years, the one thing that Jamahl has done really, really well is he's always kept the big picture in mind. Like I often tell people, he's coaching the team that this group is going to be. And he has just this very clear vision. And it's, I think it's aligned with what Jeff Weltman and John Hammond in the front office are thinking too. But he has a very clear vision of what this team's going to look like when they're successful. And he's been coaching this team to that level. And sometimes that meant sacrificing a game in the short term to get a lineup out there, and you don't have the rotation pieces to maybe sustain 5 minutes. Like I know I sat in this podcast and said the Magic are really good at playing 40 minutes, and it's those last 8 minutes that you just don't know what's going to happen. Last year I think they got to like 44, 45. And by the end of the season I think they were playing 48-minute games, and I think now we're starting to see that vision really come to fruition. We saw it defensively last year for sure. And, we'll get to expectations here, but this group really does believe they can be a top 10 defensive team this year. And that is at the heart of what they're doing. And, to get a team, especially a young team that was 5-20 last year, I think a lot of young teams would have folded and would have, really kind of gone inward, would have focused on themselves. I still think it's an incredible job that Jamahl Mosley so clearly like had the vision for what this team could be, was able to sell, we talk about salesmen, like you still have to sell a little bit here. Sold the team on this vision, and they all still bought in, and they got they obviously still fell short of the postseason, but they got the reward. They got the confidence of saying like, hey, we can compete here. And I'm curious what you think. It feels like that confidence has rolled over into the season.
Well, I think you look at a guy like Cole Anthony, right? Like Coach Mosley first had to sell him on coming off the bench. And then, now he's so sold that, you heard the way he was talking today. Like, I don't think there was any thought of him playing elsewhere. And a year ago, I don't know if that would have been the case. A year ago, he was probably thinking, where can I start? Where can I make the most money? And where can I be, the impact player that I think I can be? So first of all, Cole needed to buy into the fact that the best way he's going to be able to help the team is coming off the bench, which I think it's like, that's not crazy, right? You're not taking an all-star caliber guard and asking him to come off the bench. But every player has irrational confidence, rightfully so, and rational confidence in Cole's case. He's very close to a starting caliber player. And who knows if he was getting 36 minutes a night, what the numbers would look like. But what he did was he played his best season, right? Like he was the most efficient Cole Anthony we saw. And maybe some of that would have happened regardless because he's getting older and more experienced. But I think the proof's in the pudding then, right? Like now Coach Mosley can say, like, look, you did what I asked and it kind of reined in parts of your game, but you still are Cole Anthony. I didn't ask you to sacrifice too much. And we saw in the last 7 games of last year how much it helped and how good a role that can be for you and how impactful it can be on the team. So I think Jalen's another one, right? Like he's had a rocky first 2 seasons to his career, but and look, we're going to see how it works. But I think he came in with what felt like a different mentality into this camp. Everybody is saying, during the off season, he's been kind of a different guy. I think all of that stuff happens, especially with young players, when they trust their leader. And, it helps when you draft Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero. Now all of a sudden you've got kind of the backbone, and everybody says, well, I think I want to be a part of this. But you need all those guys to buy in. I look at Mo Wagner. We don't talk about him enough. We don't talk about a success story. Like, remember when we brought him in? It was just like, let's see. By the way, before Franz Wagner was a member of this team, right? Like, Mo did not arrive just because of that, right?
I was out on him after that first season. Like, I know the Magic drafted Franz, but like after that 12-game stint, I was just like, I'll take a freezing cold take on that. Like, I was not in on him. I was like, yeah, he scores, but he doesn't do much else. He doesn't do the things that centers want to do. And he came back in 22, had a really nice season, doubled down on it with a really good season last year. And, I still have some questions, obviously, but I'm expecting, it's very clear, you're comfortable with him being the backup center this season. And he's, he proved himself in the World Cup too with it on a championship team.
I think he took what I remember because I was in on him after the 12-game stint, mainly because there was nothing really exciting about those final 30 games, and at the very least, he brings juice every night. Those are my favorite type players. I just like a guy who you don't need to fire up. Sometimes you need to rein him in a bit. And I remember I did a podcast with him that summer, and he knew straight up. He was like, if I can't shoot threes, I don't have a place in this league. I'm going to have to be able to space the floor, and I'm going to have to do all the dirty work more so than I have. Because if you think back, I guess he was an offensive player at Michigan and in his first few years in the league, even though he didn't really have a ton of opportunities. He was like a post guy. He was like a throwback guy. He had a little pick and pop mid-range game, but not his range did not extend at all. And so I appreciate the fact that he did, going back to Coach Mosley and on down, right? This goes down to Osceola and then Lakeland. He trusted the process, so to speak, trusted the program, trusted the coach. And I do think, when you start to look up and down the roster and there are guys who have been here for a while and guys who have developed, Kevon Harris, guarantee he owes, he thinks about the opportunity that he had here and the development that he's had. And that's, that goes a long way with guys. They appreciate the opportunity, but then they certainly appreciate when they know they're in the right spot and they're being developed properly, because that's not always the case. You and I have seen bad coaches. We've seen guys who did not get poured into and then went elsewhere. and flourished. And so I think you feel comfortable if you're a player in this system that they're going to do right by you.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a good thing that, we talk about continuity and the benefits of it. And there's definitely an itching to try and do more. And you're, a group that won 34 games last year, obviously still very young. There's obviously the chance to get better. There's always this itch to do more. There's always the shiny new toy out there. But I think it still says something very, very big that all of these players wanted to stay.
Right.
Gary Harris had a fresh contract. He stayed. Cole Anthony signed the extension on Monday. He's staying. Mo Wagner, picked up, had a team option, but, he signed and stayed. Goga Bitadze signed and was like really eager to stay, and happy to see that he got his option picked up. Like, it says something to me that all these guys want to be here and really want to be a part of this project. And that's, I think, a big thing to say. But for all the continuity that we've been talking about, there are changes to this team. We saw in the preseason Jalen Suggs enter the starting lineup, and that's inevitably going to change some rotations and change some playing groups. So the NBA is always change. I always tell people in the NBA, if you're not getting better, you're probably getting worse.
Yeah.
What did you see from that group with Jalen Suggs in the starting lineup during preseason? And is this a move that you think is gonna pay off for this team?
I think what it does is it eases some of the pressure defensively, obviously, on Markelle and Franz, and really on everybody. I mean, he's a complete game set or set wrecker, game plan wrecker when he's out there. He needs to stay out there, and so that's an injury comment and that's a foul comment. But I was looking at some of the numbers last year. Like I think we undersold how much he improved last year from his rookie year, but his rookie year, the numbers were pretty rough. So I think there are certain ways to use him. And Gary was so important to the spacing of the starting lineup last year, the spacing of the team in general. I mean, he was like by far your best perimeter shooter. And when you have Franz and Paolo, you need spacers around them. So it's gonna emphasize Wendell a little bit, and it is gonna make, between Markelle and Jalen, one of those guys is gonna have to knock down spot up open threes. I'm not talking about shooting off the bounce threes. None of them are Steph. None of them are Damian Lillard. We're talking about kickouts and open looks. And I'm pretty confident they will. Jalen, when his feet are set, is a much different shooter than when he's trying to do too much. So I think I think long term. I mean, you talk about Coach Mosley coaching and designing this thing to what the team is going to be. I think long term it was the right move. I do think there's going to be times in the first 20, 25 games of the season where Gary's closing out games. Gary's playing much more than Jalen is. Jalen might be in foul trouble. Jalen might be 2 of 7 from 3. Actually, that might not be bad. Jalen might be 1 of 8 from 3, and you need some spacing on the floor. But that's my big concern, Phil, and I think it's probably everybody's. Is like, can you shoot the ball well enough to let Franz and Paolo operate? And that's going to be the big thing, I think, all season probably. If they shot the ball near league average last year for 3, they're easily a playoff team based on the way they finished and defended from December whatever on. I mean, that was really, they turned the ball over. The 5-20 start was difficult to overcome, but if you clean up turnovers a little bit and just shoot the ball a little bit better, then I think they finished 23rd, but it was pretty bad for a while there. Then I think you're great.
Yeah. And, to me, that was honestly the most exciting part of the preseason because, the turnovers are the turnovers. I've talked about this a lot. Every time that Jeff Weltman has talked about playing better basketball, which has kind of been the rallying, which has kind of been this year's level up. It's been, we got to reduce mistakes and turnovers are giving away shot attempts. Like, you can't give away those possessions, especially when you're a team. I think the Magic, everyone at this time of year says they're going to play faster, but if you're, the Magic trying to pick up the pace a little bit, they can't turn the ball over. They got to be more effective with the ball and value those possessions better. But honestly, the thing that I got really excited about in the preseason was how well the Magic did getting, 3-pointers, their 3-point shooting was up. Their 3-point attempts were up. They, first, whatever you want to say about preseason stats, my favorite preseason stat the Magic led the league in corner three-pointers per game in the preseason, according to NBA.com. They took 12 corner threes per game during the preseason. Attempts. They led the league in attempts. They led the league in makes. They led the league in field goal and 3-point field goal percentage from the corners.
I did not realize that. I off the top of my head, you go back to Wendell in that Pelicans game, the first preseason game. He hit 3 or 4 of them or something.
And that's when I picked up on it like immediately, because he had like 2 or 3 attempts in the first quarter alone. And look, there's a lot of fat in the preseason, and I will fully admit that. This is a stat that I memorized because I've been obsessed with it all preseason. The Magic averaged 6.3 corner 3-point attempts per game last year, according to NBA.com. They averaged 6.1 in the first half of their preseason games this year.
Fantastic.
Which is just like that to me, and corner threes are important because they're the most efficient threes on the court because they're the closest to the basket. They're also really the only threes that you can only get by passing the ball. Like you're not ISOing to get a corner three. That just doesn't happen. So that means your offense is working all the way through and getting the ball to a quality spot on the floor. And this was a low pass team in terms of just raw passing numbers last year. Obviously, they didn't make as many shots, so they're a low assist team. But even their potential assists, if you go on the second spectrum data, they're pretty low on potential assists per game. So the fact that the ball was moving so well in their first 3 preseason games, we can throw out the Flamengo game. The Magic had at least 27 assists in each of those games. They had 23 against Flamengo, so that's about their average last year. They had at least 27 assists in the first 3 preseason games. So to me, that suggests they're we talk about that edge that the Magic might have. There's a higher focus on executing and moving and sharing the ball on offense, and I think there was last year. And that's with, maybe Paolo not being as aggressive, or Markelle not being as aggressive, or Franz not being as aggressive as they could be. That's, I think, just coming off of basic reads and sets that they're trying to run. So, it's going to be, we don't know what's real in the preseason. We're going to find out a lot tonight against Houston. But to me, if I have a hot take to make about the Magic this year, or a prediction that I'm willing to kind of bet the house on, the streak of the Orlando Magic having one of the 10 worst offenses in the league is ending this year. They haven't had an offense out of the bottom 10 in offensive rating since Dwight left in 2012. I think that streak is ending this year. I am after what I saw in preseason, I am very convinced that I think
that seems like a safe bet. You've got 2 of the best young forwards in the league, right? There are pieces there to be a very good offensive team. I don't think they're going to be Phoenix, but it should fit, and it really does come down to what you just said, right? You have to space the 4. I think those corner threes are huge. That was Gary Harris's domain last year. Well, he's not in the starting lineup anymore, so Wendell's going to have to knock them down at times. And Paolo and Franz, frankly, just imagine what those 2 adding a bit more to their perimeter game, how that will open things up even more so for them. And then when because it seems to me like that. Jalen in the starting lineup, I have felt like they've been on a string kind of offensively. Everything has felt very crisp and fluid. And then when you go into that second unit, there was only one game, I think the second Pelicans game, where Ingles and Harris were on the floor at the same time. But those, I'm not worried about those guys, right? Those are going to be the spacers. And then you get Cole in there. Obviously, you're going to mix and match these rotations quite a bit, but boy, a second unit with Gary Harris and Joe Ingles and Cole Anthony, that could be absolutely lethal. Don't even get me started on Jonathan Isaac. If he's a part of it, let's go. Yeah.
And again, to your point, in the preseason, we did not see the Magic do any rotations. They were platooning, they were sending three, essentially the bench players played with the bench players. The starters played with the starters. We didn't get to see Franz play with the bench players like he did last year. He's probably going to do again this year. We didn't see kind of the mixing and matching and blending. We didn't see any experimental lineups that I think a lot of us are intrigued at least to see, maybe a lineup with Isaac, Paolo, and Franz together, either with one at the center or one at the 2.
Oh, do you have deja vu? The Mo Bamba, Bol Bol, all 7-footers slide up.
But
at least we're not talking about that, Phil.
But to that point though, the way the Magic are trying to play, if there is an organizational philosophy, or a strategic philosophy, we just want to play our 5 best players. There was that quote last year, during the height of Bol Bol mania, where a scout said, everyone talks about positionless basketball, but the Magic are the one team that just said F it, let's do it. But like, you look at the preseason, we got a lot of Paolo coming downhill and swinging the ball to the corner. We got a lot of Franz coming downhill. The Magic, like, positions matter until they don't, but like the Magic have 2 6'10" passing forwards. Like a lot of like what they did like I joked about this a little bit last year, but like Bol felt like, somewhat like, let's do proof of concept to see if like big forwards can work in the NBA, and they didn't, and it didn't because of him. But, I joked with people that, Bol felt like a little bit of like, let's test some things out for in case we get Wembanyama and see, how much we can warp the floor. And, I think we're still seeing a lot of those principles that they, again, like I talked about, the bigger picture was always in focus. They're always thinking about the team they're going to be, not necessarily the team they are. I think they wanted to keep things really simple for Paolo last year. It was his rookie year. They didn't want to throw too much at him. They expanded his game in some ways. They certainly gave him more responsibility as the season went on, but they kept things fairly simple for him last year. They're going to layer on more stuff for him this year. They're going to trust him to be a bit of a better playmaker. They're going to, expect him to be more efficient with his dribbling and more efficient with his shooting. They're going to expect him to be a better defender. He showed us in the World Cup that he can defend at a very high level. And honestly, if I'm going to make another hot take here, I don't know how top my takes are. They're pretty cool. But I think the Magic care more about Paolo's growth as a defender this year than his growth as a scorer. I don't think they're, I think they hope that he can continue building on his scoring and building on his efficiency. But if he comes out of this year looking like a much better defender than he was last year as a rookie, I think they'll take that as a victory, knowing that, hey, the scoring's going to be there. Like people who are like worried about Paolo Banchero scoring in preseason, I'm like, that dude's been put on this earth to do one thing, and that's put the ball in the basket. He's going to be fine. He told us that after the second Pelicans game, that he's not worried. I'm not worried. He's gonna come out tonight and show us why. I'm sure.
I was just gonna say, when you're Paolo and everything is rooted in like raw physicality, you can turn it on and off, right? Like you can play a preseason game at this level, and then tonight, I doubt we'll see him Pelican Paolo.
Yeah, for sure. We definitely won't see preseason Paolo. That is for sure.
Paolo, no.
Let's end here then. The edge that you talked about earlier, does feel like there's, I don't want to say urgency, because that doesn't feel like the right word, but there's definitely a bigger focus from this team. I've been covering, you've been around this team long enough. I've been around this team long enough where some iterations of this team actively avoided saying playoffs, saying postseason, saying anything beyond the season. This team is not hiding from any of that. This team, I think, expects itself to make the playoffs. So I want to kind of ask this question then. Is this a postseason or bust type season? Does this team need to make the postseason for this year to be considered a success?
Yeah, I think so. Like I could see, I don't know if it's the last day of the year and the ball bounces the other way and you feel like you did a lot of growing, but like it just, I think everybody saw last year what this group was capable of in those last 57 games or whatever. And I think having a young enough group where everybody knows that, like, okay, if I go home and I work on this and I come back and I'm a little bit better at this and he's a little bit better at this and it's all going to click. If we just have this group together for 82 games, who knows what can happen. It just feels like there's buy-in sort of across the way. And like, that is unique because almost no matter what, you've got some mismatch of veterans who have been here and don't want to be here anymore and are probably on their way out, or veterans trying to protect their jobs with rookies underneath them or whatever. And am I going to get mine? And there's just no agendas this year. That changes quickly, right? Like success alters all of that. Like, but I think that's what's unique about this group is you typically don't have a whole bunch of 26 and unders, like almost all of them, who want to be on the same team together and think that they can all kind of achieve their individual and collective goals in this situation, like with this group. And it just feels like you have a whole lot of buy-in as opposed maybe to years past. I like the fact that they're embracing the expectations. I think it's, I think not saying playoffs is stupid. Like, and we probably all read a little bit too much into it. But I do think, like, you wouldn't have really dared ask that question last year because you knew heading into last year was going to be kind of a long shot to end up there. They needed to make a big leap last year, and they did, obviously. So I think the timing is right for everybody, from coach on down, and then media and fans alike, to say, like, okay, let's see it. Like, and I don't think if it comes up a little bit short, that means wholesale changes are coming. But I do think that it's okay to expect growth compared to what we saw last year. And basically, if you play the way you did the last 57 games for 82 games, then you are a playoff team this year, I think.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. I've kind of been hedging my bet. I will say this unequivocally. I expect this team to make the play-in tournament. I expect this team to be, if the Magic want to take this, please do. Mission 83. The goal this year is to play an 83rd game. Doesn't matter, in-season tournament, great. That'd be fun too. But the goal this year is to play beyond game 82 of the regular season, to play that 83rd game. I think that should be kind of the rallying point. That should be what this team expects to do. I've been hedging my bet.
Real quick. Our internal mantra has been working in May. We just want to be working in May this year.
I like that one. I like that one too. If we could get to Memorial Day, it's been a while since we've done that.
All right.
We want to be watching the NBA draft lottery because it's coming on before our game.
Exactly. 100%. I do not want to be planning my lottery watch party this year, please.
Exactly. Jake, I want to thank you for hopping on. Hopefully we can have you on during the season, just to check in on where things are at. Tell everyone where they can find you on socials, as well as how they can listen to the Magic on the radio if they are unable to do so otherwise.
For sure. You nailed it. You got my Twitter account right there. That's perfect. Yeah. At Jake Chapman OM. Orlando Magic Audio Network. You can listen via the Magic app if you're in the Central Florida area. The little listen live button, or on 96.9 FM, our flagship station. And then, like Phil said, the NBA League Audio Pass. Anywhere around the world, it's $10. You get the whole season, and you can listen to us. Yeah,
and I believe if you're Sirius XM, I think they also put all the Magic games on
Correct.
there as well. Which Sirius XM is a partner of the Locked On Podcast Network, so you might hear my voice during commercial breaks there.
I love it.
Jake, thank you again for joining, and let's have a great year.
Thanks, Phil. I appreciate it. Appreciate all the work you do. We'll see you along the line, bud.
I want to thank Jake for stopping on the podcast and chatting with us a little bit about the upcoming season for the Orlando Magic. You can, of course, check him out on the Orlando Magic Radio Network, wherever you listen to the Orlando Magic, whether that's on the Orlando Magic app, whether that is on the radio on 96.9 The Game, whether that is on Audio League Pass, or from our good friends at Sirius XM. You can listen to every game. You can listen to every Magic broadcast if you're a Sirius XM subscriber, as well as on your Sirius XM device, or I don't know. Is it called a radio still? I don't know. It's not really the same anymore. But that's going to do it for me today. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. On tomorrow's episode of Locked On Magic, you could I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. I forgot my spiel already. It's the start of the season. I'm so excited. You can, of course, follow me on Twitter at @PhilipR_OMD. Subscribe to the podcast and Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Himalaya, Google Play, Spotify, Odyssey, and all the Film Cinema podcasts to your podcast-enabled listening device. For the latest on the Orlando Magic, be sure to check out OrlandoMagicDaily.com. You can, of course, follow us there on Twitter at @OMagicDaily, and be sure to check out my Patreon page for immediate reactions from the Orlando Magic's opening game against Houston Rockets, as well as a shoot-around report in the morning to get you ready for tonight's game, for this opening game. The NBA season is here. I'm excited for the journey. 82 games to go. Let's get to it. For Orlando Magic Daily and Locked On Magic, this has been Philip Rossman-Reich. We'll see you all again next time for another episode of Locked On Magic.